Chapter 1, Part 7, How to write the discussion. Usually, the discussion section is the most important and challenging component to write in a scientific paper. This section is used to analyze and explain the meanings of the results. So, from the discussion part, we can know a lot of new information generated by the study. And this part can also explain the significance and the clinical implications of the knowledge gained and provide recommendations for the future research. So it's very, very important thing to write. There are some key points here. First, the discussion section should be conscious analysis and explanation of your results. Then can converse the reader of the importance of your findings. For the first paragraph in discussion, usually should summarize the results of the study, while reminding the reader of the question that your study is trying to answer in the first paragraph. And then you also should show some knowledge gap filled by your paper, also should be thoroughly and explicitly outlined and addressed in discussion part. Also, place your paper in the context of other studies of the same topic to both highlight relevant difference and boost similar findings. Also, should how to show something for investigating and expected findings here. Also have other key points. You should, in discussion section, highlight how your study may be used to influence the design of future studies, change clinical practice, or lead to guideline or policy development or change. You know, all studies have limitations. Here, we also should show the limitations. Be sure to acknowledge them and suggest how they can be addressed for the limitation. And the conclusion should also be in your final paragraph of the discussion section, which provides a well thought out take-home message for the reader. Just keep in your mind, the conclusion should be as take-home message. Avoid repeating your introduction section and reporting new data and overspeak your findings. Much as the message and results should correspond to each other. The same thing, the introduction and the discussion should function as a pair. Be sure the discussion answers what the introduction asks. Sometimes, in discussion part, it's very harder to define the discussion than other sections. So, it is usually the hardest section to write. Many papers are rejected by journal editors because of a faulty discussion, even though the data of the paper might be both valid and interesting. Even more likely, the true meanings of the data may be completely obscured by the interpretation presented in the discussion. So, sometimes, if you get good data, you have to spend more time to focus on write the discussion part. And then your paper can be published in more high-level journal. Many discussion sections are too long and verbose. We have to avoid them, avoid these kind of things. Sometimes we have to know the relationship. In simple terms, the primary purpose of the discussion is to show the relationships among observed facts. Example, a science teacher sent up a simple experiment to show her class the danger of alcohol. She set up two classes, one containing water, the other containing gin. Into each, he dropped a worm. The worm in the water swam merrily around. The worm in the gin quickly died. This is the result. What can you get from the results? That is the primary purpose of the discussion. What does this experiment prove? They ask. The result is as above. A student from the background piped up. It proved that if you drink gin, you won't have worms. Yes, this is some discussion. So, in the discussion part, usually composed like about 8 paragraphs. First paragraph is summary of the results. From second to fifth paragraph, you should show something like knowledge gap, implementation of results, how the results fill the knowledge gap, and unexpected results, plausibility, and clinical implications, future directions. This is all included in from second to fifth paragraph. In the sixth paragraph, you should show something strength, and the seventh paragraph, you should something weakness. Then last paragraph is the conclusion, take-home message. First paragraph is summary of the results. You can summarize the results of the study. This paragraph has to be concise. It can start with a few introduction sentences to restate the rationale of the study, but then subsequent sentences should focus on whether the question asked in the introduction section is answered by the results. For the subsequent paragraph from second to fifth, the author should interpret their results for the reader and express their opinions. Be sure to outline the knowledge gap that your research fills and explain how your results fill the gap. It is also a good idea to discuss whether your results support or contrast these findings from similar studies. If the results are not similar, be sure to offer an explanation for why this might be. Finally, the clinical implications of the findings and the suggestions for future research are also discussed in this paragraph. All these things should be included in the paragraph second to the fifth. About the knowledge gap is briefly discussed in the introduction section to justify your study. This gap is elaborated upon in more details in the discussion section to set the stage for introducing your results and findings. This section can be started by explaining the results from similar studies in the past. You can also discuss the unanswered questions from previous studies. Both okay. Some the sentence like this will be a good example. Can be explanation of the results, like in a study, blah blah blah, we found that what was associated with, we offer a few possible explanations for the results in our discussion section, include the following. The results may have been due to its first. Second, there may have been another reason that then we therefore conclude that it's highly likely the outcomes seen were due to like this. Also, compare your results and findings with similar studies performed by others. If your results contrast the finding from previous study, explain your understanding of the reason for your results. In our discussion part, we made sure to highlight the difference between our results and those of the other studies. We include an explanation for why we thought the difference in study outcome exists. It's not uncommon to find a result which is significant but may not be clinically significant. This can also be explained in the conclusion section. That means statistically significant but not always clinically significant. We have to explain it. Also, if you got some unexpected results, where our study saw unexpected findings of some blah blah, we can also explain this unexpected findings by stating that this view may lead to like this. We also found unexpected results when we can explain the most other studies solely and blah blah blah. This indicated that other studies were perhaps. This is some sentence here. We should sometimes borrow it. About the clinical implications in the medical field, research is performed to improve the care and outcomes of patients. So it's extremely important to discuss the potential clinical implications of your research. Like, how will the new information from your research change clinical practice? How can your findings be incorporated into current clinical practice? Is there a need for policy change based on your study? You can discuss all these kind of things in this section. The studies that develop a new technique or the clinical trials that test an intervention are more likely to have a significant clinical impact than an observational basic science study. If your research or your data is strong or innovative, you can even make suggestions for guidelines or policy change. We can also provide for the future direction. It is important to have a section in your discussion where you state the implications of your research for future work in the field. You should make some recommendations to advance the field based on your results. Your findings may lead to the development of new methods, lead to the design for future study. So now way to analyze data or identify a new area of research like this. Sometimes you can write the sentence like this for the future direction. Basic science research like animal or cell culture studies perhaps leaves some suggestions for human clinical studies you can also discuss. The about is the contents from the second to the fifth paragraph. In the sixth paragraph, you show the strength of the study. It's important to emphasize the strength of your study. Some authors perhaps consider it immodest to know strength of their work. For example, like super experimental technique, large sample size, or long follow-up. However, such information can aid readers in determining how definitive the findings are. It can also help persuade peer reviewers and editors that your work deserves publication. You can write a sentence like this. We highlight that ours was the first study to. We also noticed that Balabala make the results generalizable, like this. For the seventh paragraph, you should show some of the limitations of your studies. What if research have significant limitations, such as difficulty with the technique, a relative small sample size, or related short follow-up? You should also provide here. Some authors might try to hide some limitations. It's not done by the reviewer or editors. In doing so, you may be able to discuss what impact the limitations are likely to have on the conclusion that can be drawn. The value of the manuscript is enhanced by showing the weakness of the study. Just remember that. It can be enhanced by showing the weakness of study by itself. Our study have limitations. Don't hide them. Address the major limitations of the study and the implications of those limitations. It is much better for the author to acknowledge the weakness and the limitations of their research than the reviewer or readers to expose them after submissions. Also, inform the readers about the limitations and give suggestions for the modification of your research design or methodology for the future research. So, the limitation, you show the limitation properly will give a plus for your paper, like the limitation of the study and paper have. For the discussion part, the last paragraph should be the conclusion. For the major of the journals, this is included in the discussion section. However, there are a few journals that require a separate conclusion section. Anyway, you do the same thing. In the conclusion paragraph, this paragraph should provide a take-home message to the reader in 3 to 4 sentences. You can also suggest a future experiment or practice change in the conclusion. So, in this discussion part, we make a summary. Usually, they have a 7 paragraph. First is summarize the results, then elaborate upon or address knowledge gap, then compare your findings to other studies, then explain unexpected findings, then suggest how study will influence future studies or change practice. After that, discuss strengths and limitations. Finally, provide take-home message in a conclusion paragraph. Then, after all these things, you almost finish the whole manuscripts. This is for this part.